Rick, as you, those of you who have been in the club for a few years may recall, is a member of our club. He used to be the membership chair, so he was aware of a lot of your names, even if you weren't aware of his. Rick is a former government lawyer, but has also developed an interest in not only in mushrooms, but in mountain climbing. And he is the executive director of International Mountain Trekking. And he led a foray in Nepal this summer with a few other members of our club, Shiva Devkota and Thomas Rail went along, and also the editor of the Fungi magazine, Britt Bunyard, and it sounded like it was a great trip. And so he's going to summarize some of what was done there, talk about some of the mushrooms that were found, as well as just what an unusual place this is to be looking for mushrooms up in towards base camp in the Himalayas.
Thanks, John. Should I share my screen and get started?
Proceed, or whatever you'd like to do.
All right, here we go. Before I get started, and before I share my screen, first of all, I hope this all works out technologically, and just if it doesn't, we'll struggle through this, but I think it should work. So here we go. Okay, is everybody seeing what I'm seeing, which is a big, huge view of the Himalayas?
Yes, looks good here.
Terrific. Also, at some point, I probably will stop my video because apparently that lets a little more of the magical juice of this presentation in through the Zoom. So, but I just want to start off by thanking everybody from MAW for inviting me tonight to share this really remarkable trek that we did this past June and July. It feels like I only joined MAW very recently, but of course with COVID time, it took 3 years out of it. But anyway, I've been trekking and mountain climbing my whole life. And I had a problem that I was trying to solve for my Sherpa friends in Nepal, and that is that they were doing all the work for the various trekkers and climbers, but getting very little economic benefit. And I formed International Mountain Trekking to solve this problem. Instead of making them employees, they became my business partners. I was able to team up with MAW member Dr. Shiva Devkota, who's with us this morning in Pokhara. It's now 5:43 a.m. So good morning to you, Shiva, and namaste. Shiva is Nepal's leading mycologist and lichenologist, and my other partner, Sanam Jangbu Sherpa, is a highly skilled high-altitude mountain guide with multiple Mount Everest summits under his belt. Together, we wanted to create a mushroom trek to Everest Base Camp to document the mushrooms in Nepal's most famous park, Sagarmatha National Park, home of Mount Everest, and some of the highest mountains on the planet. Interestingly, though, that despite its fame and notoriety, there's never been a systematic investigation of the mushrooms that grow there. So that was really our goal. So tonight, I'm going to introduce you to the Himalayas of Nepal, show you how they were formed, a little about the rich and cultural, both biodiversity and ethnic diversity of Nepal. I'll talk a little bit about climate change, and also I want to mention the mushroom poisoning prevention program that Shiva Devkota is heading up in Nepal. As John mentioned, we were joined on this trek by Britt Bunyard, editor-in-chief of Fungi magazine, and Thomas Rail, who is with us tonight and is a PhD candidate at Clark University in David Hibbett's lab. Together, we were joined by other, I would call them citizen scientists, who came from California, Mexico, Idaho, Colorado, Virginia, and Washington, D.C. We started in Kathmandu, Nepal's incredible capital, where we toured the city and enjoyed a briefing by one of Nepal's leading experts on climate change, Dr. Arniko Pandey. We traveled into the region in Toyota Land Cruisers, and I made sure that every single Land Cruiser had a huge laundry basket filled with ice and cold beer. We encountered a few obstacles, a landslide that covered the road, which we eventually got through, and an exciting river crossing. So I want to start off, let me get to things going here. We started from the village of Caracola, approximately 6,700 feet, and with Everest Base Camp as our destination, 17,600 feet. But I also want to say right off the bat that thinking of Everest Base Camp as our destination would be misleading. The trek itself was our destination, and every day we found mushrooms, we enjoyed the camaraderie of our incredible team, and we had a lot of fun. So let's get started.
If I pick up a mushroom in Nepal, I'll be like, ooh, I don't know what this is. We didn't realize they were that interesting until we got back and tried to identify them and looked into the scientific literature a bit and found like, oh, these are not very well recorded. So there's kind of initial, oh my goodness. And then later on, oh wow, this is like scientifically interesting. The Nepali people who are collecting for food mainly are just like, they have their 5 species that they know and that they know are safe. And they collect those species and dry them, and that's how they interact with mushrooms. Do what they have to do to feed themselves, keep themselves safe.
So that nice music was a Ravi Shankar tune that he composed in 1996. One of the things that I want to just point out about Nepal is its extraordinary biodiversity. You have this landscape that includes the plains, and you can see there are elephants in Chitwan National Park, the low hills of the Himalayas, and of course the highest mountains on the planet. Here's a short video of the interesting in Nepal. So just a quick word, the word Himalaya is Sanskrit for abode of snow, which is a pretty apt description. I want to set the stage a little bit for the next series of slides having to do with how the Himalayas were formed. And we need to go back about 55 to 60 million years ago when the Indian tectonic plate raced across the Pacific faster than any other tectonic plate and collided with the Eurasian plate and buried itself under Asia. This collision lifted up the wall of mountains we call the Himalayas. And what's quite interesting, I think, is that this also coincided with the end of the Cretaceous period, the extinction of the dinosaurs, to give you a sense of time. And interestingly, there are no fossils of sea creatures older than 50 million years ago, which also demonstrates this uplift from this collision. So let's see what goes on next. Oh, I'm sorry. I wanted to just mention that as a result of this, Nepal is a geologically unstable country. And in April 2015, there was a terrible earthquake that killed over 9,000 people in the country. Here's a shot from Kathmandu. You can put in the chat if you recognize the last 25 seconds of that piece of music, and you'll get a big prize at the end. This demonstrates a little bit of what's going on in that video of how the Indian tectonic plate was subducted under Eurasia, lifting up the Himalayas. And here's an extraordinary illustration showing the 4,000-kilometer arc, generally known as the Hindu Kush Himalaya. And this mountain range spans the countries of India, Nepal, Tibet, China, and Pakistan. And I like to think of it, one can think of it as a wall separating South Asia from Central Asia, which include, of course, Mount Everest. So let's talk about what's so special about the Himalayas. There are about 400 mountains on the earth that are higher than 7,000 meters or around 23,000 feet. They are all located in the Himalayas. This includes the 14 mountains that exceed 8,000 meters, which are over 26,000 feet. So a quick word about the Himalayas. They're sometimes referred to as the third pole, the north and south, and then the third pole being the Himalayas, as a place that stores an enormous amount of ice and therefore water that provides water for about 20% of the population. I do want to just say a couple things that I've observed about climate change, which in a very short period of time that I've been going there. I would have to say that while it looks pretty much the same, there are definitely observable changes. The Khumbu Glacier, which flows off of Mount Everest, has more glacial lakes. And the area directly around Everest Base Camp, where we just were, is now riddled with deep potholes of glacial melt that you need to be careful to navigate. And I think that what one is seeing in the high Himalayas is the transitional space between a foreboding present and a potentially cataclysmic future. So anyway, it's existed for millennia and provides water for 20% of the population. Here's a series of photographs starting in 1955 of the Khumbu Glacier. These photographs were taken from the Khumbu Law, or the Khumbu Pass, first in 1955. Then in 2007, this photograph by Alton Byers. You can see what's happening to the glacier on the right. And then this extraordinary photograph taken by my friend Ayaz Joshi. He was there in April during a trek that was in support of my nonprofit, the Himalayan Climate and Science Institute. The glacier is completely gone, as you can see. This is a beautiful photograph taken of Namche Bazaar, one of the largest, I would call it a town in the Himalayas. And the Himalayas is an area on the planet that has the highest population of a high mountain area. The mountain in the background is beautiful Thamserku, which is about 21,600 feet. Just for a second, I want to say that the Himalayas are the place where three of the great religions converge. As many of you know, the Lord Buddha was born in Nepal, And I like to think that the process of spiritual contemplation from the roof of the world is like a portal connecting heaven and earth. And you can imagine why this place has such a spiritual footprint. So these are images of Hinduism, Buddhism. And one thing I want to say is that all over Nepal, and especially from the high places, you have these beautiful flying horse prayer flags, which have Tibetan prayers on them. And the theory is that as the wind crosses the surface of the flag, it lifts these prayers and their message of compassion, courage, strength, and peace around the world. Here's a little video poem of this. So taken at Everest Base Camp this past April. Just a quick word, on May 29th, 1953, Tenzing Norgay and Sir Edmund Hillary reached the summit of Mount Everest. And in that order, Tenzing was first, according to what he told everybody. All right, let's see. I just want to make a small comment about my own experience. The Himalayas, in my opinion, are unlike any other place on Earth. This is especially true at night. On this last trek with Shiva and Thomas, I remember standing outside of the tea house where we stayed in Gorchep, the last village before Everest Base Camp. And I was outside and looking around after dusk, and I could see the moon rising through the clouds, and those clouds would later bring a soft blanket of several inches of June snow. And around me, I was surrounded by Pramori Peak, 24,494 feet, the high ridge of Kalapatar, and turning towards Mount Nuptse was half sensed and half seen in the clouds as the clouds blew across its icy, jagged peak, rising to 26,000 feet. It was just an extraordinary evening. I know Thomas and Shiva remember it. But I want you to imagine standing on top of Mount Everest at sunrise. Here's a photograph taken by Andrew Town. And he wrote about this photograph. I saw the sun rise and paint the shadow of Everest as a pyramid stretching halfway into Tibet, across the Tibetan plateau, in the north of Mount Everest on the other side of the Himalayan mountain range. He says, it's a view unlike anything I've ever seen before. If you turn north, if you were standing there, you will see China and the Tibetan plateau. The Tibetan plateau is a dry, arid place, roughly about 13,000 feet, about 6 times the size of California. If you turn either right or left as you're imagining standing on top of Mount Everest, you see an endless line of mountain ridges. This is Andrew Town's team descending from the summit, and right below them is the Hillary Step. And then if you turn south again, in this little thing, you'll be facing Nepal and then the lowlands, and you're dropping down into some of the most biodiverse and moisture-rich forests. And here are some photographs taken by Shiva Devkota of 4 really wonderful mushrooms. The net stinkhorn or veiled lady. This was taken in Gorkha, around 3,000 meters. Hericium down in the lower left. The upper right you'll recognize, Latiporus. And in the bottom right is the extraordinary Yartsagumba, the Ophiocordyceps sinensis, or caterpillar fungus. I want to talk a little bit about the role of altitude in biodiversity. So first, at its narrowest, the distance between the plains of the south of Nepal and the Tibetan plateau is roughly 150 kilometers. And keep in mind that with every kilometer gained in altitude is a drop in temperature of about 6 degrees Celsius. So within this narrow band, the Earth rises to the highest point on the planet. And as a result of that gradient, and with the addition of lots of rain, a unique biodiverse environment is created. And here altitude acts in a similar manner as latitude, meaning that as you hike a short distance, as you trek higher, you move through an extraordinary diverse range of ecosystems. So starting in the low hills of the Solo Khumbu, you encounter subtropical broadleaf forests. And then as you move up in altitude, you have mixed temperate forests of oak and rhododendron. And here's an extraordinary picture of the national flower of Nepal, the rhododendron. And then higher up, conifers and junipers. And above that, not much, lichens mostly. But the region is a treasure trove of medicinal plants and fungi. We did not find this mushroom, the Yartsagumba. We weren't there at the right time, and we weren't in the right place. I want to talk a little bit about biodiversity in Nepal. It's really, really quite interesting. So for example, in this small part of the world, you have 650 species of orchids, 650 species of butterflies in an area that is significantly smaller than the United States. And here is an extraordinary video that we saw. We saw these mountain tar going down this steep slope that we were hiking by. Really amazing. And while we did not see a snow leopard, they are around. And my friend Sanam Jangbu Sherpa has seen them near his village. And they're quite rare, obviously, but they're protected, and I think their numbers are coming back. So it's kind of remarkable. Here's a short video coming up about some of the megafauna in the Himalayas. This is the national bird, the dolphin. The time of year that we were there was calving season for the yaks, so we got to see a lot of that sort of stuff. It was quite sweet. A quick word about the genetics of the Sherpa. This is often asked. It's complicated. I don't want to get into a lot of detail, but they basically have a more efficient oxygen transport system. This metabolic adaptation is associated with improved muscle energetics and protective against oxidative stress. And interestingly, they do not produce an overabundance of red cells and hemoglobin, which helps them avoid problems such as clots and strokes. Their hematocrits are basically normal. But I've had the experience of sitting around with, and they're all smoking cigarettes, and we're taking, pulse oxygen, and we're at 85 or something, and they're right there at 90, 95, 100. It's pretty interesting. Here's some photographs. My friend Sanam and his mother, Ang Surki. Photograph of Sanam leading up the Khumbu icefall. And this is a picture that I just wanted to include of my daughter, Carol, when we were there in 2019. All right, I know you've been waiting, but here's something about the mushrooms. But first, a little word from Britt Bunyard.
It's really great to see species I'd never seen before, some that haven't been documented in Nepal ever before, some that have barely been documented ever. This was really special. I'm most interested in Amanita species, and we found two extremely rare, barely known species, pretty early on. So that was a real thrill. The majority of things we found, probably once people get a better handle on the morphological characters and even the DNA sequence analysis of them, will probably be new species to science. But there certainly were ones we had no idea what they were. At the end of the trek, ending up in the village of Fort Say, being welcomed into one of our guides, Sanam's mother's home for a very special dinner. You don't get stuff like that on commercial tours. And we became part of a family on the tour, and that family took us in at the end and fed us, and it was just, yeah, it was really something. That really just made the trip, I think for everyone, it really made the trip.
So look, everybody's interested in psilocybe mushrooms. We found them, never before found in this region. We don't know what species this is. We don't have any chemical analysis about it. Did not have the characteristic blue stain that some of the more well-known psilocybe mushrooms, Psilocybe cubensis, has. So we don't know whether this is hallucinogenic or not, or has those properties. But anyway, pretty exciting find. This nice, pretty jelly mushroom collected by Thomas. It's Hypholoma. And here's a mushroom that Thomas has done a lot of work on. This, the Japanese call this the hanging needle mushroom, also known as the Asian beauty. And I refer you to Thomas's article in Fungus Fact Friday number 225. We can put that in the chat, or Thomas can. Anyway, a really interesting mushroom that we see over here and is native to Nepal and Asia. Nice bolete, a mycorrhizal bolete, pretty rapidly blue staining. This is a cool little jelly, never before discovered in Nepal. Sometimes known as an apricot or red jelly or salmon salad fungus. Not really sure that I would call this salmon salad, but anyway, it's got that name. And here we have the Hypomyces chrysospermus eating the mushroom down below. This is a cool bolete. It has what looks like gills, but in fact that's just the gill surface. I mean, the pore surface of this bolete. And here's another interview of a couple people on the trek coming up.
So I studied mycology in college at the Evergreen State College with Professor Michael Bugh. Hi, Mike, if you see this, I hope you do. It's been about 20 years since then, so I'm no longer as good at identifying the species as I was back then, but it's always held a fascination for me. I think we like to go out and forage for mushrooms that we can eat. We do that a lot in California, but this has really been back to the roots of the academics I studied in college and reminding myself of how fascinating it is and how many different species of mushrooms grow all over the world. It's been really, really satisfying and good.
Yeah, and I came to this as very much an amateur. I also learned how to start foraging for mushrooms in college, and when I was at UC Santa Cruz, and riding my mountain bike around the fire roads of campus and finding chanterelles and bringing them home to cook them and having all of my roommates say, "No way am I going to eat that, you're crazy." So I know just enough to not kill myself, and she's the expert. She makes sure that I stay alive.
Here's a beautiful Amanita innatifibrilla, possibly new to Nepal. There's no known, there's nothing in any book or any recorded anything that anybody could find that this mushroom's ever been found. So this is another really cool thing we found. And here is one of the species of termite mushrooms. Oops, I want to just say a quick thing about them. It's a really interesting mushroom. They're 100% dependent on termites to survive as an obligate, a symbiont, and they all protrude from termite mounds. This is a Swillus that we found on the way up. Well, actually, no, this one was found lower down by Shiva. There's another new mushroom that's never been identified in Nepal. This nice little tremella. And as perhaps you know, tremella are parasites of other mushrooms. And so it's obviously parasitizing something within the wood. And here is this really cool Amanita tuluciana. This was first identified only in 2018 in India. And you can see that it's characterized by its ash gray to brownish gray pileus, covered with dark gray to grayish black universal veil. And the stipe is covered with these rows of recurved scales. So beautiful mushroom. Britt was very excited to find this mushroom. And here is another interview. One of our members.
The way that I got on this trek was probably the most chaotic 2 days of my life. It was for me really exciting as so last minute and thinking, oh, it's never gonna happen, and not being able to sleep really for 2 nights because I was so excited and so wanted this opportunity. So to be here in this beautiful, beautiful valley, it's truly to me always going to be a life-changing opportunity and something I'll value for the rest of my life. At the end of the day, the views aren't really what mattered on this trek. It was, you know, spending time together, becoming really close friends, talking to people, and I think we all pushed ourselves. I think I saw every person on this trek grow a little bit and change a little bit. Whether they found day one really, really hard, and maybe they found the last day hard too, but their attitude had changed, their enjoyment of whatever challenges arose had changed. So I think if you come to this region, you should expect to find a way to push yourself in some capacity. Maybe that's trying to climb a peak, maybe not.
Sarah's a Georgetown student who was in Nepal doing an internship at the Nepali Times in Kathmandu. So a little bit of a fun story on this mushroom. Shiva and I were heading up to Namche, and we were stuffing these in our bags. And a woman came along, a Nepali woman, and grabbed, I had a bunch of these, or a couple of them in my hand, and she grabbed them out of my hand and threw them in the woods and admonished Shiva not to poison his client, as she described me. And I turned to Shiva and I said, look, these look like they're what we think they are. Are you sure? Anyway, they were completely edible. And when we got up to Namche, because we were there during the off season, we could take over the kitchen. And Shiva and I sauteed these up with shallots, some Szechuan peppercorns, I forget what those are called, that we found along the way, and these screaming hot, small little green chilies, and made really terrific pizzas. You'll see something about that later on. This is an interesting mushroom, an ectomycorrhizal, widely distributed across Asia. It's being currently studied for possible biologically active substances for their anti-cancer molecular mechanisms. So interesting mushroom, we should keep an eye on this one. A Trichloma tertium, found in conifer forests, as you can see all the pine needles. Another termite mushroom, not sure of the species. Again, possibly new to Nepal, never before reported. This is a beautiful mushroom. The Boletus luridus, sometimes referred to as Suleosis luridus or the lurid bolete. This is a highly regarded edible in Europe. This is the, people may have found this over here, the orange oak bolete or red-capped scaber. It's an excellent edible. You'll see some more of this in a little while. Here we go. That's Tenzing Sherpa. We found this one just before we
The wealth of this country in terms of its culture and the natural beauty that it just abounds here is impossible to get across in words or even pictures. You know, I'm looking at my pictures and they're stunning, but when you're in it, you know, everywhere you look, I got tired of taking pictures of picturesque, beautiful places. It's like crazy. How many photos am I going to, I have no idea how many I took, but it's a bunch. And you just get tired of trying to capture on in a photo because you really can't.
Well, and you can't stop taking pictures because everything is so beautiful. You don't want to miss it.
That was actually fun because, you know, we didn't know any of these people aside from Zoom calls. Interesting folks from all over the place. That was fun.
Yeah.
Bonding through mutual misery. It's like, you know, you're all suffering together, and by the end of it, you get to be a family.
And that was so wonderful.
Yeah.
We met wonderful people.
Here's a well-known mushroom to everybody, this inky cap, found in Forte Village. Here we're getting higher up, as you can plainly see. So what's cool about this is this was found at around, you know, over 5,100 meters, pretty high up, 16,860 feet. While I thought we may have found the highest mushroom, when I was in Telluride and presented this, Juliana Furci made sure to tell me that this was not true, that there are mushrooms higher up in the Andes. So, but anyways, pretty high up to find any mushroom up this high. I'll show you a picture of it in situ. You'll see it better. So you can see there's a little bit of vegetation that it's working with. So I just want to say a quick quick word about this, about what we are calling our mushroom poisoning prevention program. The Himalayan Climate and Science Institute, which is a nonprofit that started by Shiva Devkota and Sanam Janggu and myself, have been working to help educate people in the rural parts of Nepal against poisoning themselves. And you'll see in a second what the problem is. But during COVID, along with a variety of other things, there was a lot of food insecurity, and especially in the rural areas, and they would send children out into the forest to try to find food and mushrooms. So I wanted to show you a quick slide of what the problem is. So take a look at this and ask yourself, which one would you eat? The one on the left is edible. The two on the right, obviously, are deadly poisonous. Here's a couple of pictures of Shiva teaching classes to school children about the problems of mushroom poisoning, and doing some really great work. And I'll put something in the chat later. So the rest of this is some photos and videos from our trek, just to give you a feel for what was going on. So these shots were taken at Khumbu temple in Kathmandu, the highest point in Kathmandu, a really cool place. Here is a shot of the neighborhood where we stayed in Kathmandu, Tamal. At the markets in Kathmandu. Here's a beer break that we took around 10 o'clock in the morning. We've been in these Toyota Land Cruisers for a few hours, so it seemed like a nice thing to do. As you can see, it was absolutely essential. Kind of an exciting day on the road. Just some shots. Here we have Britt Bunyard happily finding this new mushroom to Nepal. Shiva's in the left. And as you hike through these villages, you see these beautiful mani stones, carved prayers along the way, set out there by families to memorialize their loved ones who have died. Picture of a woman tending to her cabbages. Beautiful fields, beautiful time of year to be in Nepal. Extraordinary scenes like this. And really great and somewhat scary suspension bridges. You just have to kind of keep your eyes closed and just walk straight across it, and you'll make it to the other side.
So today
Rick and I have collected these bullets. This is Sulus siberius and Sulus granulatus.
Okay. Oh, nice. Nice. We're just going to wait here for our pizza. Yeah, so that's what'll happen.
Awesome. Yay.
And the kitchen did a great job with that.
So that was in Namche Bazaar. It was a lot of fun doing that, being able to have those kinds of edibles as we hiked along. This is a shot from the famous monastery in Tenbokche, coming into Dingbokche. Note Britt Bunyard photobombing the photo on the right. Anyway, just some more shots of the high peaks, glaciers, Everest Base Camp. Nupsi. So a little explanation. My friend Sanam Jangbu Sherpa had been engaged to his now wife, Pushpa, and we arrived in his village. I didn't realize this, but they were going to get married, and so we got to participate in this beautiful and simple marriage ceremony. So here we go.
Rick, thank you for bringing us all together, and we wish you so much love and success and happiness in your future together.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. So just a quick word, we were also there in time for this extraordinary Tibetan Buddhist festival of Doomji. And what was just so nice about it is everybody just brought us food all afternoon to snack on while we were watching this extraordinary display. So here we go. Oh boy. Oh boy.
Really?
But there was So we were all invited back to Sanam's mother's house. We just had a wonderful feast. Those were buckwheat pancakes with yak butter and vegetables that we rolled up. It was just great. The next morning, the weather was great. The helicopters came in and we flew back to Kathmandu. It's a really terrific way of leaving the mountains. Not only is the helicopter ride spectacular, but it's just you get to fly over everything you've just hiked, spent 2 weeks hiking, and then almost like magic, you're back in Kathmandu. It's a great end of the trek. And here's a short trailer about upcoming attractions. Anyway, I hope that this has been a nice presentation for you. Just to kind of give you a bit of the highlights from the trek. We're 14 days trekking. We found over 150 different species of mushrooms, many of which had never been found in Nepal. Some may be new species, but we'll need to do some further genomic and morphological analysis that Shiva's involved in that. We met with local people, had impromptu classes about poisoning prevention, mushroom poisoning prevention programs. We visited historic Buddhist monasteries, attended the wedding of my friend Sanam, made terrific pizzas, and some people also climbed a 20,000-foot mountain. So anyway, that's the end of my presentation. I hope everybody liked it.
Thank you so much, Rick. If folks have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I know one person asked before you talked about the fact that the rhododendron is the national flower of Nepal. He was already aware of the rhododendron forest there and was asking, are there mushrooms that are specific to that particular habitat?
You know, I don't know the answer, but Shiva is with us tonight. Shiva, do you want to weigh in on this? Hello.
Hello, everybody. Very good morning from Nepal. So nice presentation. Thank you, Rick.
You're welcome.
So regarding the questions, any mushrooms on the leaf of national flower? Yes, we have Exobasidium butleri that grows on the leaves of that's rhododendron arboreum, and actually that species is also edible. So whenever one get thirsty, then they used to chew that mushroom. Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you.
I would also like to add that the only chanterelles we found on the trek were under the rhododendron forest. So here in the United States, we also kind of have a slight relationship between chanterelles and rhododendrons. I don't really know what it is, but you tend to find the two of them at least in the same places. Apparently that relationship is also exists in Nepal.
Interesting. Yeah, Thomas, do you have other sort of top highlights? I'm hitting on you without any warning. But is there anything that stands out in your mind that Rick didn't cover? What was most exciting for you?
My most exciting mushrooms were actually included in the presentation, so I'm happy with that. The amanitas we looked up and found that they'd only been described a few years ago. Those were pretty cool. That bright pink tremella was also only described a couple of years ago from a species that was 1 centimeter, or from a single specimen that was 1 centimeter long. So this was much bigger than that. And those were in China, these were in Nepal. So range expanded right there. I've never seen Guapenia helveloides. That one threw me for a loop for a long time. But so that was exciting. Tremella fusiformis I'd never seen before, and then I saw it again a week later when I went to a conference in Florida. So that was kind of funny.
What a range!
Two ends of the earth, and I saw it for the first time in Nepal, and then for the first time in the U.S. a week later. It was really cool. We didn't talk about this one in the video. Well, the first day we found Lixinum aurantiacum. Found a nice big one, and we were like carrying it with us before lunch, and we get to the lunch place and we're eating lunch, and we start to finish up, and one of our guides comes over. This was Tenzing, who you saw a picture of, and he's like, "Look, there's mushrooms in my soup," and we're all like, "Oh my gosh, that's the same mushroom that we just picked up earlier today." Shiva and sat down and had an interview with the restaurant owner about the mushroom and how they collect it and things like that.
And they were personally foraging the mushrooms and then serving them in the soup?
Yeah, so I guess they had gone out. These mushrooms might have been from last year, since they collected mushrooms and then nobody could get into the country. So they just dried them, stored them in a container, just like we do here. And then they had broken into their stash, added some to the soup, and yeah.
Mm-hmm. So Rick mentioned there were a few species that might be new species, but they need more work. Could you or Shiva talk about sort of what's involved in that process to establish something as a new species?
These days, well, there's some debate about how to do that in the mycology community. But right now, you basically need kind of two lines of evidence. First of all, you need your morphological characteristics. So what does it look like? You have to describe the size, range, where it's growing, the type of habitats, the spore size, the kinds of hyphae inside the cap, things like that. And then secondarily, you also need a DNA sequence, at least the ITS region, but hopefully a few separate regions of the genome so that you can more accurately place it in the context of similar species. Unfortunately, we did not do a very good job of preserving mushrooms, as you might imagine, as you're kind of like, we can't like stay in one place and let some dryers go for a whole day because we had to get to the Everest base camp and then back down. So we collected some, and our coolest specimens ended up rotting, which I was a little sad about. But next time we can do a better job of that. Bring some supplies to prepare for that. So yeah, those are the two lines of evidence we need. It takes a lot of work, and my advisor here at Clark, David Hibbett, has been trying to work with these Dutch researchers to describe a new species that from the group he's interested in, and they won't share the genetic data with him, so he's kind of stuck and is upset with that. But science sometimes moves slowly, and in the case of describing new species, especially in mycology, it's one of those times where it moves slowly.
Hey, I'd like to ask you, Thomas, to talk a little bit about just not necessarily about the mushrooms you found, but just the trek experience for you, physical challenges. Just if you could talk a little bit about that, that would be, I'd like to hear, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. It was very cool. Sorry, I'm kind of in the middle of writing up a letter to send out to everybody on the trek that kind of goes into a little more detail about my experience. Unfortunately, I don't have that ready yet. So very cool. Obviously doesn't really cover it all. It was very cool from as you mentioned in the video, our presentation, you go through lots of different habitats very quickly. So just to see the succession of plants and mushrooms and animals as you hike further and further up is really neat. We were there in the rainy season, so it made it extra special every time we could see a mountain appear from behind the clouds, which normally you're kind of surrounded by mountains. We were surrounded by this like dense fog a lot of the time, but made the mountains all the more special. And it also kind of, you could feel the water cycle working because all that comes up from the Indian Ocean hundreds of miles away. So that was amazing. And you get up into these really high alpine environments where there's still plants and birds and pikas and things living up there where you feel like they shouldn't really be living just because it's at such high an elevation. So the tenacity of life is quite astounding. My experience on the trek. Oh, there was another part to that question, wasn't there? I lost it.
I mean, look, it was a pretty broad and open question. I think you've talked about it a lot. Look, I will say this. This was, I couldn't believe how great, how much fun I had. I know everybody had a lot of fun. every day I think was an adventure. I remember even driving in, you know, we would stop the trucks and people would literally, you know, jump out of the trucks to find mushrooms. And and we just had this sense of discovery that animated everybody. And we all got along great. I think I expected that, frankly, because I think that I think there is I don't know whether it's a genetic predisposition for being collaborative and sharing, what I like to call a robust generosity of spirit among people interested in mushrooms, but that certainly was on display among and between us on this trek. One thing I just want to point out is that we were able to send a group of people up a pretty high mountain while we were doing this, Lobuche Peak. So several of our team went up almost to 20,000 feet, didn't get to the summit because it had snowed. That snow I mentioned covered the peak, made it a little more challenging. But as we always say, the mountain will always be there. And like I always like to say, getting to the top is optional, getting back down is mandatory. Anyway, I'm so glad, Thomas, that I get to see you at least in this Zoom video tonight, and Shiva as well. So anyway, thank you.
We had one other question, which was whether there are any issues with taking specimens out of the park or taking them out of Nepal, or are you leaving everything with Shiva when you're done? Or how does that all work?
Yeah, well, I can speak to that. Shiva has a permit I think it's about 3 years now. I think he's got a permit that will enable him to remove specimens from this national park for study in Nepal. But we were very careful about that. And Shiva has an extensive herbarium that he keeps things in for study and for a project that he's been doing over a period of years of digitizing all of the mushrooms in Nepal so that they can be available. But yeah, no, we're very careful about that, and we didn't have a problem with that, but we had permission.
Awesome.
Shiva, I had a question that you might be able to answer. First of all, whether there are mushroom field guides for people in Nepal, and whether there's a kind of citizen scientist interest in mushrooms the way there is here, and whether on this trip or otherwise you interact with those people in Nepal to try to discover what's there.
Thank you, John. I actually wouldn't have any sort of field guides so far, unfortunately. So we are trying to compile all our pictures, whatever we have found from the Everest area. And also I'm trying to compile all the pictures which I have taken, so far. So hopefully in next few years, we'll have a kind of field guide, but so far, unfortunately, we don't have any sort of field guide. Of course, we have some publications in journals, and we have some publications like a checklist, okay? Only like a checklist, but we don't have really a field guide with all the color plates and all the detailed informations. And regarding the citizen scientist and the knowledge, I would say that I would say like indigenous local knowledge from the indigenous people and local communities. They are not all well documented. So whatever information is available so far is written either in local journals or in some scientific publications. So we don't have any sort kind of publications or booklets or books, especially for booklets and for the describing the total diversity and with their color pictures and everything. So sorry, we don't have such resources so far.
A follow-up question about that, because of all the microclimates and the changing temperatures as you go up the mountain, that's like a whole year of seasons put together when we have to wait for particular mushrooms to come out in every particular season. And I'm wondering whether what happens there is that the fruitings just progress up the mountain and back down the mountain as the temperature changes, and you can go to a particular level and find that particular mushroom over a longer period of time because of the changing temperatures. Is that what the climate's like there?
Yeah, this is very this is very interesting questions, and what I have realized is also the same thing. Like as Rick said, that we have, you know, we have different climatic conditions in a very narrow ecological or in a narrow altitudinal gradient. So if you cross like 100 meter, and then we have different kind of vegetations, we have different kind of flora and fauna and birds. So it is typical with mushrooms also. What I have found is that from the altitude like 1500 to up to 3005-meter altitudes, there always remains a cloud band. There always remains a cloud band, and the diversity of mushroom is quite higher in that belt. So let's talk about the Laetiporus sulphureus. So if I could get Laetiporus sulphureus is in early monsoon season in the middle spot, like in 1500-meter altitude. But if I go higher up, then I could even get that species even after a month. You are true in that sense that we can find same mushroom in different time periods, in different altitudinal gradients. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I have two last questions for you. One, is there any commercial cultivation of mushrooms happening in Nepal?
Yes, indeed. We have very few commercial mushrooms growing since last 50 or 55 years. And the very common are like Pleurotus ostriosus and Agaricus biasporus. Mm-hmm. These two mushrooms are very common. And since last couple of years, like Auricularia species, Auricularia auricola, and also the lentinus shiitake mushrooms, mm-hmm. and also Ganoderma lucidium. They are getting popular in last couple of years, okay. But they don't have really a very long history. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Elizabeth, what's really fun is when you go into the markets in Kathmandu, you see lots and lots of mushrooms, both dried and fresh, being sold, in big quantities. These are obviously cultivated, so it's really it's an important part of the diet, of the Nepali diet. At least what we saw, at least what I'm aware of seeing in Kathmandu. And again, what stimulated the idea behind this trek is when I'd come to Nepal on previous treks, not focusing at all on mushrooms, but focusing mostly on getting to the top of whatever mountain I was chasing after, but seeing mushrooms on the menu of every tea house we stayed in the Khumbu or in other parts of Nepal, and also seeing people bringing back from the forest big baskets of mushrooms to dry on the roofs of the houses. So I knew they were there, obviously, and once I found Shiva, we could put this together.
Sounds like you could go mushroom collecting in the markets.
Yes, you could certainly do that, among other things.
The last question was just someone asking what the prize was. Was it Carmina Burana?
It was indeed. Very good.
All right, Johnny got it. He beat
anybody me. Who identifies that and gets in touch with me and signs up for the next trek in June 25th, 2023. I'm serious. I will give you a 10% discount, which will be a valuable product.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you.
To the mushroom cultivation question, I would like to add that we did see, as we were trekking up, one woman who is cultivating mushrooms in a shed, basically. So that was kind of cool. No access to like giant pressure cookers or anything up there, but she was making it work and had some lovely looking oyster mushrooms grown out of these little clumps of hay bales. And then a lot of the other mushrooms are not cultivated in that region, but foraged in the forest. And as Rick said, they're very common. So that is another common way to actually get mushrooms, at least once you get out of the Kathmandu.
Yeah, I would like to add a little extra note on Thomas' remarks that yes, as Thomas said that we have very little. We have very few numbers of mushrooms in the markets from the commercial point of view. So basically, as I was born and raised in the medials in the mountainous part of Nepal, like I was collecting mushrooms from my early childhood. So I know several mushrooms which to eat and which to avoid. So this is the same story with every children.
Mm-hmm.
So this is really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much. This was a great program. And hopefully it has piqued some people's curiosity about the next trip.
Hope so. All right, thank you again.
All right. Thanks everybody for coming out, and we will see you in October, if not before. Good night.